you have some challenges that you put out because of your book, right? So I think there's 5 challenges in total.
Yes,
Is that right?
yes, something like that. Let
Um,
me send
yeah,
them
go
to
ahead and pull those up.
the chat.
It is interesting that Imruk is saying that he is using XML instead of JSON, which yeah, I guess that would work. I don't hear a lot of people using XML these days, but if it works,
Mhm.
it works.
If it works, it works. But the question is, are there people that still send data over the wire in XML?
He must be that. And yes, he uses X element. So C# does have some built-in XML parsing functionalities, and you can kind of pick out things. There we go. Okay, so
Okay.
this is my screen.
Just an introduction. In the book, I'm using the example of a library management system where users can borrow book and search for books in the catalog. And there are authors and librarians and stuff like that. So that's the data realm we are dealing with.
Right, and that's this whole data model.
Yeah, so it's a library. There is a catalog. Uh, yes, and it's let's say deeply nested. So in the catalog, we have the books by an index of books where the keys are the ISBN, the book IDs. And then for each book, we have a record, the ISBN, title, publication year, author IDs, book items, it's the physical books. And then there is another index with the author by ID. And then we have the user management stuff. But I think here we deal more with the catalog, right?
Yes, correct. And I mean,
Okay.
this is a very good example of like the discomfort that we talked about before, right? Because this is deeply nested. I mean, it's really only 3 levels, but probably more nested than you would typically have your data if you work in C#. Because I would say that I look at this and like I kind of like hurt on the inside, like where's my classes? I want to split this up and all those things instead of having to parse through a big tree, basically. So that definitely is a bit of a switch, and that I think would be kind of the same with that Imruk is doing with the XML, that you have these nested things, and he is using the built-in link to XML functionalities to kind of pick that out. So that does help. So he's reusing the already existing functionalities
Mhm.
of C# that have been in there for a very, very long time and apply them to data oriented programming.
What kind
Which is
of
great.
features Link give you as a
So
developer?
this is linked
On
to
the map,
XML.
reduce, stuff like that? Map filter
Um,
reduce?
I'm not entirely sure about link to XML because I don't use a lot of XML,
Mm.
but I know there's what he mentioned, the X elements, where I believe you can literally say, this is an XML file, give me this particular attribute, give me the values for that.
Mm.
So it's parsing, much like you may have with JSON. And he's
Yeah,
putting
he's
in the
writing.
chat right now,
It's
yes,
basically you get all the SQL stuff or the
right.
functional
And
manipulation.
so that is kind of what Link on the flip side is, because Link is a data query language inside C
Hmm.
sharp. And it reads like SQL. There's two modes. You have like a read like SQL mode, or you have a read like a Lambda operator mode.
Hmm.
And you can mix and match, choose which one you want to use. And
Yeah,
typically
so
that
that's
is used for
I
these
forgot.
things.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that's the big added value that you get. The big benefit you get when you represent your data with a generic data structure
Mhm.
is that if you need to do a manipulation or a query, you don't need to implement anything. You can
Right.
leverage functions that are battle tested for years.
Correct.
Whereas if you have your own classes and hierarchy, you need to write custom code to deal with every piece of data fetching. So
Yeah.
that's the trade-off.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. And Link has been part of the language for a very long time. It is a very core piece that something like Java doesn't really have an equivalent of. And it is also used with stuff like Entity Framework Core to actually query databases. So, and you can do any data manipulation on some collections. So it
But
is really powerful and cool.
so I'm a bit confused. What was the use case for that 10 years
For
ago?
Link,
Yeah, what kind of data would you manipulate with Link? Database is one thing, but
Sure. So collections. Collections is a general concept in the language.
But what would you represent with a collection?
I mean, you could
Everything.
do taking the library data here as an example. I may have a collection that is book items or author IDs or something like that. So
And
it's
when you say
split into stuff.
collection, it will be like a dictionary or
Yeah, or a list or
a
something like that.
class.
Yeah, yeah,
But you
yeah.
cannot
So
mix classes and use link on classes, right?
no, because it's a parser, right? So it goes over data
Yeah.
and manipulates it. And so
Okay.
you can do things like a for each and then give it a lambda expression and then it'll perform those kind of things.
Mhm.
So all the methods that Imrook is saying in the chat, those are actually those are link methods that you can do on most collections. So the XML must be treated on um as a collection. So if Herman's is saying you can use link on class, well, if the class is a collection, it inherits from collections. Yeah, because you can implement your own collections, and then it would be a class.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. From I think that link and data-oriented programming are very similar, I would say,
Hmm.
or
But
link
link is a
support.
means to an end. Like you could
Yes.
use it for data-oriented programming. Yeah,
Yes. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I think enough introductions. We can now move on to real
sure.
C sharp.
So I took a quick crack at the first two challenges. So
Okay.
retrieve a piece of information, write a function named getBook property, retrieves ISBN and field name, and returns the value of that field for a book with the given ISBN. So let me go to my Visual Studio. So I implemented the library data. I just copied what you have for the library data. So we can take a look at what that looks like verbatimly copied into C Sharp.
Mhm.
So I created an immutable dictionary.
So
And
immutable dictionary is built-in on C sharp. It
yes,
doesn't
yes,
require any
it
third party.
correct. Yes, it is part of the systems.collections.immutable namespace. Um,
Right.
it is fairly new,
Hmm.
but yes, it is built into the language. So, and I'll show you a little bit more about the documentation and the actual implementation of the immutable dictionary. Uh,
Okay.
but here,
So,
so I added normal dictionaries inside it, which you could
so
do
the type of the dictionary is the keys are strings and the values are
is object, which is the base
object.
type in C Sharp. So it could be anything.
Because you don't know, it could be a
Right.
string, a collection, a
Exactly.
number.
Yes.
So
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. So it's just object. So and in this case, the keys would be new dictionaries, right? So creating just our dictionaries, and here you're seeing we have string array can be used as a type, uh, string tuple array. So it, I think it's fairly similar to what you had in your example.
Yes.
Um, C sharp being an O language, there's a little bit of boilerplate. It's explicitly typed, so you do have like the new dictionary everywhere.
Could you would it make sense to take a JSON as a string and pass it into this dictionary?
You could definitely do that. Yeah,
And it will work with all the nesting, etc. The
I think
parser
so.
will see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah. And then the key here is this to immutable dictionary method call, because you see here that we're actually just creating a dictionary first, and
And
then we're doing the to immutable dictionary because you can't directly create an immutable dictionary at this point in time.
is it efficient or does it clone? Do you know?
Um, I am not entirely sure whether it clones under the hood. Um, I am not sure, honestly. Yeah.
Okay.
So so that is the library data, and Imrook is saying for you can use JSON and do link to JSON and Newtonsoft JSON. Newtonsoft they kind of did away with that in .NET 5. It's now all built in. So previously there was something called Newtonsoft to JSON, which is technically a third-party package that allowed you to do a lot of easy JSON parsing. And
Mm.
Microsoft and the .NET Foundation kind of took that and implemented it into the language after many years of people just using that basically.
In Java, I play with that. They have a a JSON library, Google JSON that
Yeah,
does
and
probably the
yeah,
same.
yeah, and BHRM it's system.text.json. That's the current thing because at least in my experience, it is somewhat rare that I have to actually use an actual third-party library for anything in C Sharp because most of the things are already in the language, which is very, very nice. Unlike something like Go, which I also work in a lot, but you have to use a lot of third-party libraries because the standard library just isn't big. So that's definitely a big plus for C Sharp, and including the immutable dictionary stuff.
Yeah,
So they
that's
have
the Microsoft philosophy, right? You
right.
you buy Windows and then you have everything you want.
Exactly, yeah, and there's more immutable collections as well, but I just used immutable dictionary for now. So let me go to challenge one. I'm not gonna say this is pretty code. I slapped it together pretty quickly, and it's some error handling and those kind of things. But it does work. I have the unit test to prove it. So to get a
What
book
is this
property,
question mark? What at the, some
on line 20 at this one.
yeah, question mark and dynamic. What does
Okay,
it mean?
so dynamic is this is what is exactly what it says. It is a value that we don't know the type of. It can be anything. It comes from the old interop days of C Sharp, like
Mhm.
way back where you maybe didn't know when dealing with a a Windows API what you were getting back. And then the question mark is a null operator. Basically, it is saying this could be null. The dynamic could be nullable.
So what's the difference between dynamic and object?
So object is an actual type. Object is the base type that like 99.9% types derive from in C Sharp. And you can always upcast to that. Dynamic, it isn't technically a type, so you don't get some of those basic type methods with it. You need to put it in something else.
And you need to cast when
B-
you
Basically,
want to
it
retrieve, if it's dynamic, when you want to
you,
retrieve the value or to print or to
right.
do something, you need to cast it
You'll
or
do an explicit cast, yeah, to what you want it to be, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I have that library data that I imported, which is what we just looked at. I do a try
Mhm.
get value, which returns either the value or the dynamic or the default value. And it puts
Mhm.
it in catalog, which we have here, and then we grab the value just by going down to books by ISBN, and then we're grabbing the ISBN in the field. So this is not link,
Just a
but
second.
yeah.
Why? Um, I see that you have two patterns for accessing data. One is with the square brackets,
Hmm.
and one is the try get value.
Right.
When do you use one or the other?
So I just did it because I wanted to use both of them.
Okay.
I don't necessarily have a great answer for that. So I like using the square just direct access pattern, mainly because so try get value does give you some safety because it tries to get the value and it basically lets you know that if the value isn't there.
Mhm.
But the downside is I need to use the out keyword with the catalog, and then because you don't use that a lot in C sharp. Like the pattern is there, but it's not something, at least in my experience, that people tend to go for. So it makes the code just harder to read than just straight up array access.
Mhm.
So that's really why I did it.
Okay. And why? What is the meaning of the question mark
Hmm.
after catalog and
So
after the square bracket?
again, it's null again. So we want to avoid null pointer exceptions,
Mhm.
typically. So and that has been a big design um, paradigm shift of C sharp over the last couple of years. That they really want to remove null pointer exceptions in the entire language because they're very dangerous and they're typically mistakes. There's very few cases where you actually want to set something null. So what they do is, you can now say, oh, this is a nullable type, right? This is a nullable reference, nullable value type. So what this does is this is basically saying, I want to grab from catalog, but if it is null, don't throw a null pointer
Continue.
exception. Just yeah, just assign. Yeah. So we're not gonna try getting books by ISBN if catalog is null.
So and then the value will be null.
Right. It'd be the default of the value. Yeah. No.
Wow. So you know that in Clojure it works this way. But in JavaScript, it doesn't work this way. And in JavaScript, it's a nightmare. Sometimes because it's dynamic, and sometimes you want to do just a.b.c.
Right.
And if b doesn't exist, you get a very annoying exception.
Yes.
And you'd prefer a null, but there is no easy way to achieve that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's
So
amazing. Yeah, I think that's a really
very
cool
cool.
example of the flexibility of the language.
Right. And then so that's that pattern with the try get value. If it is not there, it'll throw an exception. So that's what you see here. So we get the argument null exception that we catch, and then rethrow, preserving the track state. Stack trace. So let's say we do this, and the field wasn't there, so it wouldn't necessarily be null in this case. But if it is, we check for that here. So this is saying return value unless it is null, then do the string.empty, which I really like this double question mark null coalescing operator feature in the language. I actually had an argument this week with somebody while writing Go code about how useful this is, and there's some proposals to add that to that language, but it is syntactical sugar, I realize, but it makes your code just easier because I don't have to write my if statement. If value is null, then return string.empty, or just an empty string, else return value. I can just do it as a one-liner, which is very nice.
So let me see. On the one hand, the function returns a real string, right? A non-nullable string. On the other hand, it can deal with non-existing fields. So during the processing, value might be null. Then at the end, you
return empty string
to an empty string.
Right. Unless there was an actual exception, right? Like then we'll rethrow the exception and handle it up. But yeah, if we say, this value just doesn't exist, but all the prerequisites were there. The book was there, the ISBN.
Yeah.
But something isn't there, then we're just gonna do a string.empty. And this is another thing in the language that some people don't like this, because you can just do an empty string, right? But I like doing string.empty. That's just a little bit more readable to me.
Yeah, I love it.
So let me run the unit tests for you, so you can actually believe me that they worked.
I already believe you.
Right.
Just by looking at your code. Or at your face.
Right. There we go. So you can see all unit tests passed. I can show you that. So it's get with valid, get with an empty ISBN, which that's then when you would get the empty back, right? So if it's empty, you throw the exception. So this is how you would unit test for that in C#. You just say I'm expecting an exception during this test.
Do you have an example with a field that is not a string? The value is not a string?
I do not. I can add one and see what happens.
Yeah, it will. I think it will illustrate the discomfort.
So let's see. So
publication year, for instance.
Publication year? Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to create a new unit test then. Live coding, that is always exciting.
Sorry about that, my friend.
No. With unexpected type. So I'll just remove that because I don't know what's going to happen really. So ISBN, and we want to get publication year. And then compile. Okay. Run it. And what is going to happen? So it looks like we got an exception. Key not found exception. Okay, maybe I did that wrong. So we have the ISBN. Oh, let me use this ISBN. I copied it from a test that didn't have the correct ISBN. That's why. So if the ISBN isn't found, we throw a key not found exception. So
Okay.
because that is not the ISBN of my book. And let's have a look. Okay, so what happened here? Cannot implicitly convert into string. So this is where we would have to deal with separate types, because the language doesn't have a way to go from int to string implicitly. So we would have to do an explicit
So
cast here. So
what line
this is
was
gonna
broken?
be challenge 1, line 45. So it's in here. It's gonna be line 28 here. So it's
Because the
this one.
value is a string, is a nullable
Right.
string, and in
Right.
fact you see.
So to be really, adhering to the principles, we probably need to change the method to allow you to return, not more than just a string, so dynamic or something. So maybe this works. Let's have a look. It maybe, I'm not entirely sure. But then you get into issue that we may not want to return a string.empty on null. Maybe
So
we
leave it
do,
nil. Leave it null.
but let's have a look. Right? I'm curious.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, I'd need to look at it a bit more. I'm sure it's a very obvious thing to the people in the chat. But yeah.
Yeah. One trick that I.
Oh, here. This is why.
Oh.
We set value to. I bet that is why. And if not, then I look like a fool. There we go. So now it passes.
Wow.
So
amazing.
let me run the other tests again. So because I'm sure we broke something, right? Nope. Everything passes. So, but what you then have,
Wow.
like, we kind of lose, right, the explicit typing here, because now I'm not
Yes.
returning a string anymore. So now where I call get property, now I need to deal with what type this is. And to me, that it's kind of like it may work if you are the owner of both the calling and the expecting code, but I don't really want to return a dynamic to, if I'm a library or something, I don't want to return dynamics out of that, because now I put the onus of converting this and type checking everything on somebody else.
I'll tell you in a moment, but I'll tell. Can you show me the test again?
Yes.
Because I'm really impressed by C#. Here.
So I mean, I can check the return too, but I just checking that it's not throwing the next time.
Can you compare it to the actual the expected publication year? Yeah.
Sure. So let's see what we're returning. We're returning dynamic. So, and here I'll show you this too. That a lot of people use var as well, so you can do that, or you can do dynamic because it's explicit typing. But I am not a fan of the var keyword. I will always do explicit typing. But that is very much, I'm very much in the minority, I think, in the C# world with that one. But so let's do result insert. Let's see. Probably we can try R equal. That may not work. Expected, which is 1987. Result. So we'll see if this works. I have doubts because it needs to implicitly convert to int. So we'll see. But then we could do like a type check or something. Oh, it worked. So just for my sanity, I'm gonna make it 1986, and hopefully this should fail. I do this quite a lot. Yeah. Okay. So we're good. So it was able to implicitly convert.
So this is really, really amazing by C#, because it's a dynamic. It's a supporting dynamic types inside the statically typed language. It's kind of the opposite of TypeScript. Instead of bringing type safety into a dynamic language, you put dynamicity or dynamism into a statically typed language.
Right. And Godek says in the chat something interesting too, that dynamic has a place when you can define a type, but var is just an explicit type that you don't have to stop. Yeah, and that's true. So var is syntactical sugar, right? Just in any other language. I just like explicitly typing when I can, because I don't want to be in a scenario where, like, if I do this var, I don't know what the return is here.
So
Like if
okay,
I'm
let
working
me
not in an
address this
IDE.
question. Yeah, so that's the biggest objection on the
Hmm.
approach, and
Right.
I'm going to give you a very simple answer.
Okay.
The thing is that 99% of the time you don't care what data is there. You are just going to serialize it to JSON and send it back to the client.
Hmm.
So you don't care that it's a number or a string. The serialization will deal with it, and the serialization code is generic. So if it's a number, it will be left as a number. If it's a string, quotes will be
Hmm.
it will be wrapped into quotes, and that's what I meant when I introduce and say this paradigm is a good fit for information systems.
Hmm.
Because in the information systems, you fetch data from the database, you manipulate it in a generic way, and then you send it down to the client. You
Right.
don't look at the data on its own. So it's okay not to care whether a publication year is a string, a number, or a collection, whatever, it will work.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, that
that's
makes total sense. And I think within the framework of data-oriented programming, yes. Um, I just like knowing, like, if this is something I defined, I still want to know what I'm getting
yes,
back, because then it does matter, because it changes how I need to operate on it. Um,
exactly.
so,
And then
but
there is
yeah,
a
for
trick.
this could work, right?
There is a trick that is done by the JSON library that I mentioned earlier, is that they have multiple getters. For example, here, there will be a method, instead of get book property, you will have get book property as string, get book
Okay,
property as number, get book property as Boolean. And,
sure.
and
But see, to me, then you're kind of losing the generic point of that.
yes,
Like because that kind of seems messy to me. Like either do it, like just do it
definitely.
generic then. If you're trying to do data on the program and you want to be generic, just do the get book property and figure out how to do it as opposed, because that is not very maintainable too. Because you're gonna
Yeah.
have to do this for at least every primitive type. Then I would assume.
Yes.
And like yeah, that seems like a bit of a maintenance nightmare.
Yeah. Wow. But I'm really, really impressed by C Sharp.
All right, well,
It's
let's keep it going, and hopefully challenge two is good too.
yeah. Okay.
So in challenge two, let
So
me get
here
this
I
up.
give you a grade beyond expectation.
Good, good.
A plus plus.
Awesome. C sharp.
C Sharp. Yes.
Okay, so for the second one, write a function named book info that receives a string or returns a JSON string that contains book information about the book, whose title contains the given string in a case-insensitive way. And then you're not allowed to extract the author names from the author ID. Assume that they're opaque strings. So that was a nice little twist. So once
So
again, I have
basically, we want to allow a user to search for a book, and by
yeah,
giving a query, and we return the book that match the query with extended information about the books.
right,
And we have to
right,
do like kind of a join between two parts of the catalog, the books
yeah,
and the author
right.
piece.
So I'll preface this that this is not necessarily very clean code. But I just tried to get it to work. I really
Yeah,
wanted to get back in and clean this up, but I didn't have the time to do that.
yeah.
But we do use a little bit of link here. So we grab our catalog again. Same thing there, and then we grab the books by ISBN again.
Mm-hmm.
If the catalog is null, we throw an invalid data exception, and then here we see some link. Right, like we see
Oh,
the first of default. So what this does is for those books by ISBN first, gets to dictionary explicitly. Then first of default is you give it a lambda predicate that is
mm-hmm.
the comparison basically, and otherwise it returns a default for that thing, which typically ends up being null. So for this, I'm saying if it is equal to the title, we're good. Grab me that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the title, and then sorry, then ignore case, and then we grab the value. So
Interesting. So
that
link
is yeah.
is like Lodash in JavaScript. Or Lodash is a copy of link in a sense.
I haven't used Lodash or a lot of JavaScript honestly, so I'll take your word for that. Yeah.
Yes. It's implementing all these functionalities
Yeah,
in
and I mean this is really cool stuff because well, like I said before, like if you have a database or something, under hood it's treated as a collection, so you can do this on databases and stuff like that. It's really
Mhm.
cool. Godeka says, yeah, link a Lodash is similar. Thank you. Um,
And when was Link
oh, a long time
invented?
ago.
Long time ago,
Um,
right?
I like C#2 probably something like that.
Way
It's been
before,
in there for a long time.
way before Lambda in Java, right?
I'm not well. Lambda and Java isn't that fairly new?
Yeah,
C
not
Sharp
fairly new,
3
but
is what they're saying in the chat. So C#3 that's probably early 2000s, early to mid
yes.
2000s. Yeah, I was not around in the programming world back
Mhm.
then. So if the book is null, then we
Or
throw it in.
someone is writing here. Link and Lodash are similar.
Okay, good. Yeah. So yeah,
And
so
Java took a while to catch up with lambdas and
mhm,
streams.
it's
Yes.
yeah. So and then we have our book info. So creating a new book info dictionary, and this is a nice little highlight. This is new in the C# world, being able to instantiate with just new and the braces instead of having to type dictionary, doing
Hmm.
it that way. Which I still go back and forth on this. I don't necessarily like it because to me this is very similar to the var keyboard, except you do have the explicit typing here on the left hand side, so it's better. But I go back and forth. I'm more amicable to this than the var keyboard.
So the compiler, I don't know, looks at
Yeah,
the,
it knows that this is what you're creating because like the argument is that I'm retyping the same thing twice now,
yes.
which the compiler can just see that we're assigning to a book info which is type dictionary of string of objects. Why do I need to do it twice? I'm like, fair
What
enough.
about the opposite direction? Could you be explicit on the right side and implicit on the left side with
Well,
var?
with var, yeah, right. So it would be well, actually, yeah. See, it's not dynamic in a sense that it now knows what this is.
No,
You
but
do still need to give it this.
yes, yes.
So I'm sure you can get this to work. Yeah, that it's
New.
angry right now, but
Okay.
oh, new, yeah. There we go. Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
once you
People were
when you
saying it in the
use
comments too.
var,
Yeah,
it's an explicit type, right? The
yeah,
compiler
yeah.
knows the
Var is
booking
just
for
syntactical sugar. That
syntactic sugar.
yes, this really means it's an explicit type. Yeah. And so Gothica puts up the thing that really is probably the correct balance, that use var, when it's an explicit type and when you know that this is what it is. Like I can read this and know that this is gonna be a dictionary, but if it is, get X, I don't know what that is.
Yes.
If I care about that, right? So in the data oriented framework, I may not care what the data is, but if I do care about it, now I need to look at the code. And I do not
Mhm.
want to look at the other code. Beyond the argument, oh, you should always read the code that you're calling. Sure. Back in reality, I don't want to read the code. So
Yeah, and it's really a hard job for the IDE to figure
yeah,
out what is the type of book info.
right. So and yeah, the ID knows that it's the correct type. So here we do the tracket value again. We get the authors by ID, pull it out, and then um, book authors ID explicitly gets it to a string array, and then we just loop over it,
Mhm.
store it because I couldn't grab it from the other place, right? So add that to the book info, then serialize it to the built-in JSON serializer, which I believe this is the new one. Yeah, so here you see using system.text.json. So previously you would use Newtonsoft for this.
Mhm.
And this just returns a JSON string that's serialized.
Yeah, and here at line 52, you see an illustration of what I've mentioned before. You don't need to
Hmm.
create a special type for book info.
Right, right,
You add an author on the fly and that's it.
right.
So that's again, that's the balance. On the other hand, you don't know what are the fields in book info.
Hmm.
But again, that's the balance that we talked about.
Right. So if we then look at the unit tests, um, so we can see, I just had this JSON string, which is what
Yes.
we're expecting, and it's correct. I'll run them. Actually, we ran them before. They're over here.
Yeah. I do you know? Do somebody know how could we avoid this nightmare when we have functions that return JSON string and we don't want the unit test to be fragile because comparing strings is very, very fragile. You cannot
Sure.
add the white space, and if you add a new field, you never know what is going to be the order of the fields in the string.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering whether there are
Um,
tricks to manage JSON strings in the context of unit tests.
hmm. I mean, you could use regex or something. I've done that before, where you know that this is going to be a string made up of numbers, because an ISBN has a set format. You can do tricks like that.
Mhm.
Off the top of my head, I don't know of anything. I'm sure maybe if somebody knows in the comments what they've done
So
before in
my
that
trick,
case.
the trick that I advise in the book
Hmm.
is to deserialize back to a dictionary
Oh, sure.
and then compare dictionary with dictionaries instead of
Yeah,
comparing string with strings.
yeah, that would
Uh,
work. And like if this was actual code, I probably would have a struct, right, that, or a class or something like that already, and then I could deserialize it too.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, but at least for the unit test case, this told me that it was fine. And I tried with the lowercase kind of stuff, so that all works too.
Mhm.
Get
Yes.
book with invalid. I was gonna throw an invalid data exception.
Very nice. Yes, very, very nice.
So that
Um,
seems to work pretty well. But like I said, it's not the cleanest way of doing it. And
yes,
there are suggestions in the comments, like Bjorn is saying about the try get value, check and return things. Yes, that right. He's right. There's definitely improvements, but it seems that at the core, yes, you can do data-oriented programming with C sharp.
yes. And to me, it seems like a better fit than Java. There are a couple of language features that really support this kind of
Hmm.
dynamic approach,
Right.
and Java is not there yet.
Right. Well, link is
Yes,
one of
Link
the
is
big things that if C sharp did not have link, it probably would have the same issues as Java. So that really is the killer feature in this regard, and really the language itself, it is one of the killer features that it has over other languages.
yeah,
Um,
and the support.
so
So, did you say that JSON is supported natively now?
so yeah, there's JSON parsing natively. So if you
Yes.
look, I've got a chance to. So there's JSON serializer. The serializer is all that stuff. It's built into the language. This is not an external
Yeah.
package that we built in. None of this had external packages. This was all built in the language. All the stuff in this code.
So we
Because
have
I
Link.
don't like pulling in external packages, because now I have to do package management.
Yes.
So if I can avoid it, that I have not really encountered any language that is great at package management. C sharp has NuGet. Go as Go modules. It's always a mess when something goes wrong.
Always. And you have to
Always.
manage versions and dependency hell
Right.
and
Java is
great.
like Gradle, Maven, like it has a bunch of different ways to do it. It's just not a pretty thing. So with C sharp, you can really avoid it a lot of times, which is very, very good. If you want to do something real funky, maybe, but rarely do I have to import things.
Wow.
So those were the challenges I had.